Well, my clock says that it's just about a minute or two past 9. I just told Brother Jerry I was waiting for the bell to ring, but then I remembered that the bell doesn't ring at 9 o'clock. I've only been teaching here 23 years, and so I'm still learning some of that. But we're certainly glad that you're in here today. Glad to have Brother Jerry and his good wife with us. Before we get started, going to ask Brother Lee Snow, if he will, if he would lead us in a prayer, and then I'll introduce our speaker.
Let's pray. Father in heaven, hallowed be your wonderful name. We thank you for this week, for this lectureship, for this school. Father, we pray that you will continue to bless it, continue to bless us with the ability to learn about you and to teach and preach your word so that others can learn about you as well. Father, we pray for Brother Barber as he's about to present this lesson, that we can learn from it, learn how to help our local congregations, and learn how to help each other as we strive to follow you. It's in Christ's name that we pray. Amen.
Amen. Again, we welcome each of you to the Memphis School of Preaching Lectureship. This is a highlight of our year, but especially this year, it being the 50th anniversary of the operation of the Memphis School of Preaching. It's not really the 50th anniversary necessarily of our lectureship, but it is the 50th anniversary of the operation of the Memphis School of Preaching. And it was my privilege to attend here a long time ago. And but at any rate, it's just always been a highlight of my year if I could come back and be a part of the lectureship even before I was teaching here. And but you helped to make it that way by your presence, and we appreciate you. And if you're out there preaching the Word of God or supporting it, we are glad to have you in our company today. And it's my privilege to introduce to us on this hour Brother Jerrie Barber. Brother Jerrie Barber was raised in Centerville, Tennessee. He attended Freed-Hardeman University in Henderson, Tennessee, back in 63 to 66. Probably was college then, wasn't it? And, of course, today, university. Graduating with AA in Bible. And also he went on and got the third-year certificate in Bible. And then in 1967, he graduated from David Lipscomb University with a major in Bible. So he's had a great interest, of course, in Bible. And we appreciate that. In 1961, Jerrie preached his first sermon at the age of 16. And so he's been preaching then a while. Since then, he's preached full-time for congregations in Yorktown, Tennessee, Madisonville, Kentucky, Dalton, Georgia, Nashville, Tennessee, Franklin, Tennessee, and then in quotes talks about his retiring. I guess he just moved on from necessarily that located work, but he's still continuing to preach, and he's done internships in Kentucky and Tennessee, several places in Tennessee, and he's now working as an interim with in an interim situation with the Northside Church at Jeffersonville, Indiana. He's married to Sister Gail Champion. They have 2 children, 6 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandson, which I know that they enjoy them. In addition to local preaching, Jerry's done work in the area of leadership development, which brings up to really our topic today. And certainly we need great leadership in the Lord's church, don't we? And not just operation or management by crisis. He often consults with elders on how to improve communication, how to develop better relationship with deacons, and also, of course, preachers, as we're going to be talking about it today. His topic this morning is elders, preachers, and contracts, which is certainly a very vital topic. We're all concerned about that. Sometimes we maybe have some insecurities as gospel preachers along that line, and so that contract may help us. But he's got some insight to that. So we're glad to have you, Brother Jerrie, and come speak to us.
Thank you, Brother Billy, and thank you for being here. Congratulations on a half-century of excellent service. It's been 61 years, but I remember that day. I was 10 years old. A gospel preacher was holding a meeting at Ship's Bend out from Centerville, Tennessee. And on the way to school, he took me to school, which meant I didn't have to ride the bus that day. He said, "Jerry, I wish you'd decide to do something right now." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Become a gospel preacher." And that preacher drove a 1956 Chevrolet, light green and dark green, and his name was Garland Elkins. And he was one of my heroes at that time, and I've continued to appreciate him and his influence. You never know what a little suggestion will do, and never forgot that, and appreciate it very much. Good to have Brother Keith Mosier while I was working with the church at Murray City, and we got to talking about contracts, and I guess that's the way I ended up here. Let me begin by just telling you where I learned a lot of this. I didn't learn it at Freed Hardeman or Lipscomb, because I don't remember, even in Preacher in His Works class, ever talking about that. I don't know that a lot of people had contracts back then. My first full-time work, they had never had a full-time preacher, and I had never preached full-time, and so between us we shared a lot of ignorance on how to get along with each other. I went with just about no agreements. In fact, I sometimes wondered if they really wanted me to come. Tom Holland recommended me, and I thought they wanted, and so I moved in. We've been there about a year, and I asked if I could have a week off. They said, well, sure, that'll be fine. It was close to Christmas time, and one of the elders got up, and he was just tickled. He said, Brother Jerry, we've collected some money here, and we'd like for you to have that. Had $30 in an envelope. And Gail says, what are you going to do with the $30? And I said, Gail, if it's okay with you, I'd really like to buy me a new pair of Sunday shoes. I said, the ones I have, my feet get wet every time it rains. They got holes in the bottom, and they're not worth fixing. And she said, that's fine. How are we going to make a car payment? I said, well, that's in the budget. She said, they won't pay the Sunday you go. I said, sure they will. She said, no, they won't. I said, sure. Everybody knows you get a week or two vacation. And sure enough, a week went by, and 2 weeks went by, and I didn't get a check for that week. And so I just called the elders, and I said, what is your policy about preachers and vacation? They said, we never had a preacher, and we don't have any policy. I said, well, again, trying to please, I said, it's okay. It really wasn't okay, and so that wasn't honest. I said, it's okay, but the next time I need to save some money. Well, do you need to borrow a little money? No, sir. No, sir. I just need to know, what to do the next time I want to take a few days off. And one of the elders finally made a suggestion. He didn't do nothing, don't give him nothing. And they quickly agreed, and that's the way we did that. So what did I learn from that? You know what? It would be good when you start working, what are the rules? Are there any vacation allowed? What about weeks off for gospel meeting? Is that with pay or without pay? Just talk about what are the rules. And so guess what? I went to the next place, and we got it down. 4 weeks for gospel meetings, 2 weeks vacation. If you leave, you have 90 days or until you find a new work, whichever comes first. Had all of that worked out. Man, that's great. That's great. Easy to understand. Until 8 years later, when I was relocating, one night in a meeting, one of the men asked, are we paying Jerry for running around all over the country trying to find a job Sundays he's not here? And the treasurer said, yeah, we pay him every week. Well, Jerry, what about that? Okay, during this 8 years and 4 months that I'd been there, 2 elders died and 1 had retired. So no elders are serving that I came to serve with. And I said, well, when I came, Brother Ryden, Brother Price, and Brother Holly were elders, and we agreed 30 days or until I relocate, whichever comes, or 90 days until I relocate, whichever comes first. And they look around to Brother Holly, who has resigned as an elder, but he's still a member. Brother Holly, you were an elder then. What about that? He said, seemed like we talked about that, but I don't remember exactly what we said. Wow. Wow. What did I learn from that? Not only should you have agreements, but those agreements need to be written. They need to be written. I suggest written, multiple copies. Put 1 copy in your safety deposit box. Back it up to carbonite in the cloud as well as Dropbox. Well, what a lot of people say, well, Jerry, I don't think it ought to be that way. Back in my daddy's day, they just shook hands and everybody was honest. That's fine if that worked out for your daddy. Here's who I think does not need a written agreement. people who will never die and people who will never forget. And you need to be working with people who will never die and never forget, or who have been baptized in the Holy Ghost and have the spiritual gifts of supernatural knowledge and prophecy. But since that ended quite some time ago, back before the Depression, for several years, I think, see, God is a writing God. See, people have tried to tell me from time to time, well, that's just not very spiritual if you can't trust people. That doesn't have anything to do with trust. It has to do with memory, has to do with accuracy. God is a writing God. You go back to Moses, he went up on the mountain to get the Ten Commandments. What happened? It was written by the finger of God. Exodus 31, verse 18. Moses said in Deuteronomy 9, verse 10, then the Lord delivered to me 2 tablets of stone written with the finger of God, and on them were all the words which the Lord had spoken to you on the mountain from the midst of the fire in the day of the assembly. God thought it was so important that he wrote some of it even in stone twice, and that was before copiers. You probably know that Moses is at least one man who broke all the 10 Commandments the same day, and so they had to make another copy of them, and God wrote it down. We find in the New Testament, whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. It's written. Why didn't God just say, well, I'll tell you, and you tell somebody else, and you tell somebody else, and you play the game of gossip? Accuracy doesn't last very long. And see, that's where you get into that problem when, and I've talked to a good brother this morning who suffered at that. You go work with a congregation, and they have 3 or 4 or 5 elders, and you make an agreement, and don't write it down. One dies, another moves, and then stay 10 or 15 years, and nobody was there that made the agreements. Well, our brother so-and-so said this. No, he didn't say that. He said this. Well, the way I remember it was, here's a principle, 2 or 3 principles. One is a pretty good rule Jesus made, or at least repeated in Matthew 7:12. Therefore, whatsoever things you would that men should do to you, do you even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. And then later in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, he said, don't swear. He said, here's what a Christian needs to do. When you say yes, you need to mean yes, and when you say no, you need to mean no. But what if you forget whether you said yes or no? Or what if you forget whether you said 39,000 or 20,000? Or 2 weeks vacation or 1 week, or 90 days to find a new work or none? Many good, faithful brethren have failed to keep their promises because they didn't write it down. They were not dishonest people. Somebody gave me a good definition of lying, which has been helpful. Every time you don't tell the truth doesn't mean you're lying. Lying is trying to get somebody to believe something I know is not true. That's a lie. Sometimes people don't tell the truth because they forget or they have bad information. And one of the ways to keep from doing that is with a contract. So, first church, no agreements, nothing written. Second church, good agreements, nothing written. What happened in that meeting? One of the men, he was there when the church started. It started in his living room, and he was the treasurer. He said, brethren, we have paid every preacher that's ever worked with us while they were relocating, and we're going to pay Jerrie as well. And the person who asked, he said, oh, I just wanted to know. I was one person away from being seen as a preacher who's trying to get money that doesn't belong to me. That doesn't need to happen, and it hurts my feelings when that happens to people. So, the next place I went, we wrote everything down. And as a result of that, I have not experienced any misunderstandings. This is something I should have known, but I didn't until I learned it. I became so convinced this was a good idea that since our children were 13 years old, we had contracts with our children. I read an article in Reader's Digest. The man wrote an article called Adult at 18. He said as they were approaching their daughter's 13th birthday, it just popped into his mind, in 5 years, my daughter's going to be an adult. She'll be able to go to the Army without my permission. She'll be able to vote for the President of the United States. And if she's going to be an adult, we need to help her to assume those responsibilities sometime before her 18th birthday. And so they started a gradual plan, and we did that as well. And so we had contracts with the kids. We had a clothing contract. When they were 13, they started buying their own clothes. Now, we accrued the money. We knew how much money we spent in the budget, but you have this many dollars per month. You need to keep something good for Sunday. It needs to be modest. Gail had an agreement. If it's wash and wear, I'll put it in the washer, take it out of the dryer. If it needs to be ironed, you iron it. And it was a joy to shop with a 13-year-old boy, trying to find good clothes on sale and asking how much polyester does it have in it. Back before, this is a long time before cell phones, we had a telephone contract. Before they ever drove out the driveway, after they got their license, we had a driving contract. Who's going to pay for the increase in insurance? If you have a wreck, who's going to pay for the deductible? If you get a ticket, who pays for that? And so when my son totaled a pickup, he got his license the last day of August, totaled his pickup on December the 5th. He called and said, Dad, I've had a wreck. Jerry Wayne, are you okay? Yes, sir. Truck doesn't look too good. I got there, it was wrapped around a tree. I said, well, you know you owe the deductible. Yes, sir. I said, really? There's nothing left to discuss. We need to call a wrecker. Contracts are a way of solving conflict before you get into conflict. The best time to solve conflict is before you get into it, because there's no emotion involved. Nobody's been violated. Nobody's been disappointed. You decide how you're going to relate to each other before you relate to each other. Now, here's what's interesting. I didn't fuss and say, boy, if you're going to wreck them, you're going to have to pay for them. You think I'm just made out of money? You didn't have to do that. We already decided. No, you said. But the next morning I was shaving, and I got to thinking, now, wait a minute. Did we agree on he pays all the deductible or half the deductible? Let me go check. And I went down and checked the contract, and you know what? It was half. And so when he woke up, I said, Jerry Wayne, you might want to read the contract. He said, oh, Daddy, I just pay half of it. He made $250 by reading the contract. Here's my experience. Every time I had a disagreement with my children about what we agreed on, I was wrong. Every time. I'm not a dishonest daddy. I didn't want to cheat my kids. I forgot. See, I thought about saying all the deductible, but I thought, let's ease them into this a little bit at a time. And so when we checked the contract, it was half and not all. So, what do we need to put in the contract? If you'd like to get copies, I have a copy of my contract at Barry's Chapel, my initial contract there in 1993, online at jerrybarber.com, spelled with an I-E, or barberclippings.com, or betweenpreachers.com. All those will get you to the same place. And if you'll go over to a place called The Search, where it talks about searching for preachers, you'll find a contract of Barry's Chapel, and then you'll find an interim ministry contract that I have now as an interim preacher. Here's what I like to have in a contract. Number one is job description. What do you want me to do? And just outline preaching, teaching, whatever you expect. And then I like to have in my agreement how I'm going to relate to the elders. How am I viewed in that congregation and relating to them? Do they simply decide what they want me to do and tell me? Or am I able to meet with them and talk and work with them? I went to one congregation. Incidentally, something that I like to do when I am considering working with a congregation, I like to talk with preachers from at least 25 years back. The best way to write a contract is to do a lot of work before you start writing the contract. There needs to be investigation on both sides. Generally, I find that elders want some tapes, CDs, podcasts of your sermons, videos if possible, 3 references, resume. I was moving in 1988, and I got a call from a classmate at Freed Hardeman who was serving as an elder, and he said, "Jerry, I hear you're thinking about moving. Would you consider moving to Mobile, Alabama?" I said, "Sure, be glad to talk with you." He said, "Well, send us 3 references, 3 tapes. Send a resume." I said, "Okay. I would like for you to send me your attendance and contribution for the last 5 years. I'd like for you to send me 2 tapes of your present preacher, Sunday morning and Sunday night, and 3 references." There's a long silence. He said, "What do you want them for?" I said, "What do you want mine for?" He said, "We don't know you." I said, "I don't know you. Let's get acquainted." That's called equalizing the pressure. See, everybody is trying out when we're trying out. The church is trying out, the preacher's trying out, so why don't we just say, let's talk and see if we fit? I think that a good transition is not when you hire a good preacher, but when you find a good, faithful preacher who matches with what the congregation needs at this time. And so we need to talk about that. So I went to one congregation, and I knew their history had been that the preacher did not meet unless he was requested. It's like King Esther. She goes in. If they extend the scepter, you live. If you don't, you die. So I talked about that. I said, I know your past. You've never included the preacher in your meetings, and you may want to continue to operate that way. If you do, you need to get another preacher. If I come here, I will be your encourager. I'll be your supporter. But I gotta have a relationship to do that. A lot of times people say, "I don't know why the elders made a decision like that. I don't see how they come up." I said, "Well, I realize that it's not popular. I realize that it was a difficult decision, but I can tell you this, they talked about it, they looked at all sides of that, they prayed about it. And the reason I can say that is because I was in their meetings and I saw that. And if I see that, I'll report that. If I don't see it, I'm not going to tell something that I don't know anything about." And so I want, and hopefully I have an idea too that might be helpful. Here's what my present contract says. Meet with the elders at regularly scheduled monthly meetings or at times otherwise requested to serve as a consultant and resource person. Share thoughts, ideas, suggestions, new possibilities, all with the understanding that the wastebasket exists. Let me illustrate that, tell you what that means. When I go to interview with a church, I carry a big blue wastebasket from Office Depot. And as we talk about the possibility of me working with them as an interim, somewhere during that conversation, I said, if you'll permit me to come and work with you, I'll give you every weird idea I've had in the last 55 years. If you like it, that's fine. If you don't, here's a wastebasket. It's not going to hurt my feelings at all. Now, I like to put a filter on the wastebasket. Don't throw anything away that God said. But in my work, I'll say many times it's my opinion, it's my observation, this is my judgment. I think it's pretty good, or I wouldn't say it, but you may think it's not worth carrying home, so here's your wastebasket. And so that's what the wastebasket means. Have an honest, open, responsible, respectful relationship with the elders. Provide evaluation of the relationship, giving both strong points and those needing improvement, which means we talk about how we're doing with each other. What we won't talk about, we'll divide about and divorce about. We need to talk about anything that concerns us. Here's one that I have included I guess starting the last three interims. This is my criticism contract. Any criticism of Jerry Barber will be directed to Jerry Barber, and it will be welcomed. Jerry Barber does not accept anonymous criticism. Brother Barber, a lot of people are upset. A lot of people are upset. Well, who are they? I don't know, just a lot of people. Well, tell me, there are a lot of people. It's confidential. Don't do that. Don't do that. There's an idea that someone came up with one time, and it says if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you've gained your brother. If that doesn't work, there's step two. Take with you one or two more, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if that doesn't work, tell the church. A lot of people use those just in reverse order. We tell the church through email, text, Facebook, whispering campaigns. You can't do it right. You can't obey Matthew 18:15 by having a fit in the foyer. There's too many folks standing around. You go and talk to them alone. And so I just have an agreement. I don't do it. I love criticism. Didn't always do that, but if I had another hour or two, be glad to talk to you about that. But I love criticism, and I welcome it. I say, thank you, man. Anybody who finds salmonella in my refrigerator and tells me about it is not hurting me, they're helping me. I don't want to get sick, don't want my wife, kids, and grandkids to get sick. And so I welcome anybody that tells me any way I can improve or anything that I need to remove. Now, it's my responsibility to decide what I do with it, but I appreciate anybody who's concerned enough to tell me. So, here's the way that works. I found out the way it works is that folks forget. And the same thing is true with the whole contract process. People forget. And so it's my responsibility to hold all of us responsible for what we agreed to do. And it's the elders' responsibility to hold everybody responsible for what we agreed to do. We all agreed, and we need to hold each other responsible. And so, first time I had this, somebody came and said, Jerry, we've had 1 or 2 people concerned. I said, don't accept oh, I forgot about that. Tell them come talk to me. Well, see, Brother Barber, that is a good idea, and that'd be nice, but see, we have some people who would be uncomfortable with that. My first series of lessons when I go as an interim is Luke 9:23. If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and come after me. Crucifixion is not comfortable. Crucifixion is not for recreation. It is painful. Yes, it's uncomfortable. I have stage fright every time I speak. People come out and say, ooh, your hands are cold. Yeah, I'm scared. Oh, yeah, I am too. Right now, my hands are cold, palms are sweaty, my mouth's dry. But I'd rather speak to 2,000 people every night for 2 weeks than to make one Matthew 18:15 visit. To go to somebody and say, we need to talk. But that's what Jesus tells us to do. Now, once we got that established at Laverne, which was 2 or 3 interims ago, the elder said, Jerry, this is pretty neat. This takes a lot of work off us. Just tell people, come talk to you. I said, yeah, works better for you, works better for me. They said, what if when we get our new preacher, if we put this in his contract and also that the elders will not accept anonymous criticism, and when somebody comes to the preacher, all criticism of the elders will be sent to the elders. How would that work? I said, man, sounds like a great idea to me. And so new preacher comes in, he's got that in his contract. He doesn't accept anonymous criticism. Elders don't accept anonymous criticism, so somebody comes to the preacher and says, I don't like what the elders did. The elders meet Tuesday night at 7 o'clock, and right over there, they'll be glad to put your name on the list. Well, I don't like what Bill did. Well, Bill's standing right over there. Go talk to Bill. And then, if we could just carry it one more step, if any member has any criticism of any other member, we're not going to take anonymous criticism. You go to that person alone, and then you go to the other steps. Here's something I'm suggesting. And I think it's very important. It'll be interesting to see if anybody does this. But I do it now in interim all the time. And that is, decide how and about when do you plan to leave before you preach your first sermon. That's a lot better than being at a place 4 years and 9 months and going to an elders meeting. They say, incidentally, Brother Barber, we just keep people 5 years here, so in 90 days we'll be expecting you to move. Oh. Family rules are usually unconscious, unspoken, but understood. And so if I'd known that, I might not have moved here because I might want to stay longer than that. So talk about it before you get started. How are you going to leave? Did you know that a lot of preachers destroy 20 or 30 or 40 years of good work by leaving mad, and they tear up stuff on the way out? We oughtn't do that. It's not right. And so let's talk about how we're going to do it. I believe it's good to plan your funeral before you die. Gail and I planned our funeral several years ago. And we used to take this little, we called it our card vacation, card retreat. We would go somewhere between Christmas and New Year's Day. We sent birthday cards to everybody in the church and anniversary cards to all the couples in the church. And for the first 2 or 3 years, we'd just be sure and sign those cards. They got to go out today. Man, I'm already running late. So we said, why not just do it first of the year and have it done? So we'd go sign them all and address them all and put them in the right order. And on one of those, we said, let's just plan our funeral. So Gail wrote down her songs and I wrote mine. We shopped for caskets and all of that. My daughter called and said, what are y'all doing? And she said, we're planning our funeral. And she said, y'all need to get a life. But I found it very, very helpful. I like to go back and review that about once a year, and if you get mad at anybody, you can take them off the pallbearer list. And right now, I don't know if any of you read my blog, but one of the last blogs that I wrote is Buying a Tombstone and Other Uncomfortable Subjects, where I suggest this on talking about leaving before you get started. And so I'm now taking bids for a tombstone, and I hope to have that finished. I've got 2 bids. If you know anybody's got some good prices, let me know. But I want that set, and then that'll have pretty well things taken care of, and once we settle our death issues, we can live a lot better. Jesus did that. Matthew 16:21, from that time, Caesarea Philippi, after Peter confessed, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus said, we're going to Jerusalem. We'll suffer many things of the elders, chief priests, and scribes, be killed, and the third day rise again. And he talked about it over and over and over and over again. And they didn't get it. They fussed. They had fusses about who's going to be greatest in the kingdom. But after he died, they said, well, he told us. And that's exactly what he said he's going to do. He worked out his death during his life and helped his family, his disciples, to work through that, and they were in good shape after he left. So I suggest doing that and then renew that, bring up that discussion about once a year at least. How long do you plan to stay? Well, how long do you want me to stay? Let's talk about that. Here's what happens. Elderships change. People die. People move. New people are appointed. And before you know it, if you stay very long, nobody who entered into that original agreement, even if you had a good written agreement, agreed to it. I didn't agree to that. That was 10 years before I became an elder. So you really don't have an agreement. One of the things that I did, I went to Barry's Chapel, and I found out they had a fuss every 2 years for a decade. They'd had the fuss of 86, fuss of 88, fuss of 90, fuss of 92. I came in 93, had the fuss of 95 after I got there. And this past third weekend in November, I took a week off, and we went back to visit, and I had a Saturday night meal with those elders. We lost our eldership on Father's Day of 93. And appointed a new eldership November 19th, 95. I went 93. In 95, we lost our elders, appointed new ones. And we just reminisced. 20 years fuss-free, 20 years fuss-free. And so when I went to Bears Chapel, I told them that I wanted to do interim ministry. So we started doing this. If you want a 25-year man, I'm probably not him, because I want to enter into this when I'm young enough to do it. And so every year, I'm still planning to do that. We talked about it. And then one day, one of the elders said, "Do you have any idea when?" He said, "You can stay here as long as you want to. Stay here the rest of your life. We're happy with your work, but we have a 90-day agreement with you, and we want longer because we want to make a smooth transition. We want more than 90 days. So Gail and I talked about it, and I said, "Looks like April Fool's Day of 2007 would be a good day to be my last day." That's on a Sunday. And so 3 years ahead of time, I resigned, and we worked through those last 3 years, and it was wonderful. The last 20 months we spent trying to visit every family in the church and tell them goodbye. 5 tasks of dying. Forgive me, I forgive you, thank you, I love you, and goodbye. Whatever you're dying from, wherever you're leaving, good way to leave. Forgive me, I forgive you, thank you, I love you, and goodbye. And just had a wonderful goodbye. And a month after I left, they had $1 million contribution day for a new educational wing, which is a bad idea when you don't have a preacher. But we had made a good transition. They had another man lined up to come in, and it went well. If you'd like a book on that, it's called Next, where they talk about planning succession. The last sermon I preached with any congregation as an interim is this. People say, "It must be hard being an interim preacher, just stay a little while." I said, "Yep, there's some things." Man, it's the best thing I've ever had. I mean, interim. A lot of times some of my preacher friends, "Jerry, how you doing today?" I said, "Great. Interim ministry is fun." See, I have in my contract that I will not be considered as the next preacher. I've already quit. They can't fire me. That's job security. But my last sermon is that every Christian is an interim minister. We're here only a limited amount of time. That's those passages, and Peter says we're pilgrims, we're sojourners, we're strangers. Somebody came before us, and somebody's coming in after us, and our opportunity is to make it easier on the people who follow. I like no suicide contracts with elders and deacons. One of the most painful things that can happen in the life of a church is have somebody commit leadership suicide. Leadership suicide is where any leader, elder, deacon, or preacher just gets fed up, and he stands up on a Sunday morning or Sunday night and says, "I quit. I'm out of here." And he nods at his wife, and she steps up, and they walk out the back door stomping. And they said, "Where'd that come from?" Horrible, absolutely horrible. And so what you do as Christian gentlemen, you say, "I'm not going to do that." And so what our elders at Bears Chapel agreed to do when they became elders and deacons became deacons is to say, when you realize you need to make a change, we'd like a 3-month notice. We'd like to make a good transition. We'd like for somebody else to know what you've been doing, and we'd like to make that real easy. Now, if you have the most frequent symptom of heart trouble or get run over by a Big Mac truck, we will not hold you to this. Otherwise, you know what the most frequent symptom of heart trouble is? Sudden death. And so if that happens, then you're not required to give a 3-month notice. Other than that, you need to give a 3-month notice. Contract. States salary. When and where is it going to be paid? I endured 8 years and 4 months of humiliation. Here was the ritual. I'd walk in on Sunday morning, the treasurer would say, "Here's your check." "Well, where's mine? I wish I got something like that every week. Man, I wish I got that much money for working 2 or 3 hours a week." That was funny for a week or two, but 8 years and 4 months of that. And so now I ask not only how much am I going to get paid, how often will I get paid, but where am I going to get paid? I learned something. I'm a slow learner, but after a time or two, the University of Hard Knocks is powerful. Moving, weeks off, Part of my contract, understood under no circumstances would Jerry Barber be considered as the next full-time preacher at this congregation. I like to have a yearly evaluation, but I want it understood in that yearly evaluation that it will not be a listing of all my faults from the last 12 months. We had an understanding, again, at my last full-time work, we had what we call the 48-hour rule. If anybody gets unhappy with anybody else, we'll let you know within 48 hours. We're not going to collect all those, and each year at your evaluation, Jerry, we'd like to talk with you about 14 things you've done wrong over the last year. And 13 of those you've been doing for 12 months. Well, why in the world did you let me go that long without telling me? I might could have corrected those. So I don't want to listen. It was one of the most encouraging things. I look forward to my yearly evaluation. What they did is they wrote down everything they remembered that was helpful over the last 12 months. They'd already told me what they didn't like. Why would they want to repeat that again? And so they would list classes, and they would list sermons that were helpful. And I suggest 2 raise clauses in the contract. Number one, a cost of living raise will be given each year. That just keeps you even. That's all it does. You buy the same number of loaves of bread this year as you did last year. And although inflation is not very high, a few years and you'll get in trouble with that if you don't get that. That's just given. Number 2, a merit raise will be considered and will be discussed as to why it is or is not being given. It's my observation that folks don't like to talk about painful subjects. But the discussion in that is as important as the money. What is it that I could do to improve to deserve a merit raise? And if you'll tell me, I'll try to work on that next year. Another thing I like to have, or something that we did to implement this at my last full-time work, we had a time in each of our regular meetings once a month. We called it leadership relationships. And what we would do, we'd go around the table, elders and preachers, and we'd say, how's it been at your house the last month? And we would talk. Been pretty good. Took a vacation, all the kids doing pretty good. Or had a little cold, but everything's fine now. Here's one that I remember, though. We got to one of the elders one night, and he said, well, since the last month, Daddy died. Mama's sick, moved in with us. My wife had her 3rd back operation. We wish she had never had her first because it's worse than before she ever had her first operation. Last week, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. I lost my job Friday. Wow. We need to pray. And we did. And we go around that circle every month. See, my understanding is that every bit of that comes out in every elders meeting. We either talk it out or act it out. And it's a lot better if we get to talk it out. I have this idea that when shepherds will better shepherd the sheep, but if shepherds don't shepherds probably won't shepherd the sheep. If we're not able to talk about that as fellow Christians, then how in the world do we expect those folks in the congregation to come and talk to us about their delicate and serious issues if we 4 or 5, half dozen men won't talk to each other about it ourselves? See, we can practice medicine with each other because we understand each other. We have a relationship, or should have that, with each other. Well, those are some of the things that I think about. We got about 4 minutes. Any questions, comments, criticism, evaluation? I love it all. Yes, sir.
Question. In my country where I'm from, Jamaica, we don't have elders. And the phrase is coined, leading men.
Mm-hmm.
So in that situation, if the church employ a preacher, what would you suggest how these men should operate, and what kind of contract would they put forward to the preacher?
I would work it out with them just as I would. I mean, somebody has to lead, and you have to be accountable to somebody. Young man graduated from Freed-Hardeman. He went to preach for a church where a man had been there 30 years. If I called his name, you'd know him. He was one of the best read men in the brotherhood, spoke on a national radio program, and some of you may guess who it was. He just had books and books and books and taught at one of our Christian colleges. He followed him. This man had a business in town, but they wanted a full-time preacher. And so he comes, fresh out of school. He's there a few weeks, and they said, well, glad you're here, but we wish you'd maybe study a little more. He said, okay, I'll do that. And so they said, well, you're doing better. But, you know, the reason we wanted a full-time person is we wanted somebody who would visit, so you need to visit a little more. He said, okay, I'll do that. And so they said, well, you know, your sermon's been falling down here in the last week or two. And here's a man who is struggling every week. And finally, he said, brother, I can't do this. He said, get somebody to, he said, write me a job description. So they met on a Sunday afternoon to write a job description. And they went back and forth and what is most important and what priorities you need to take. And finally they said, you know, this is hard work. Why don't we fire him and get a preacher that doesn't want a job description? So that's one way to solve that. But that's what I would do. Good question. Somebody else. Yes, sir.
I'm at a congregation right now where we mentioned that we wanted to have a contract, but nobody has drawn up the plans. How do you suggest going forward with that?
You have elders?
No.
Okay. What I would suggest is either get a committee together and draw up their want list, and you draw up yours. I like to bring what I want to the table and them to bring it, and let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. There are things that I like to do. For 20 years, I taught a class called Future Preachers for boys in grades 1 through 6. And so that was part of my contract. I wanted to do that. And then work it out. What if they do that? If they absolutely refuse, I would write down and say, here is my understanding of what I need to be doing. Would you read that over, please, and see if you agree with that? Now, that's not as good. Let me just make this observation, and again, I know where you are. I had a young man who had been through my Future Preachers class, and he came to a church. He had been there a month, and he said, Jerry, do you have a copy of a contract? I think I'm going to need one. After you unload the moving van, it is tougher. But it's not hopeless. And I think to discuss. Thank you very much for your interest, for coming this morning, and for permitting me to be with you. I appreciate the 50 years that you have done and the good that you've done, will continue to do, and thank you for the opportunity to be a part of it today. Incidentally, if you need to call or anything, my contact information is on. I have two websites, one called New Shepherd's Orientation. I blog on that on the first and second Tuesday, and then Between Preachers on the second and fourth Tuesday. And if I can be helpful to you, I've got email, phone numbers, and all of that. I don't know everything, but I have been down the road a time or two, be glad to talk.
School of Hard Knocks is a great instructor, isn't it? It does hurt. Some of us can remember Brother J.A. McNutt, who tried to give us a lot of practical advice. He said, much like you had said, he said, I didn't have anybody to explain this to me. And he learned through the School of Hard Knocks what not to do and things of that nature. It's been my privilege to be with the Coldwater Church of Christ for 34 years. And I'm not the local, I call it the local pastor. I'm not the local pastor there anymore. I'm one of the elders. And but it's been a good relationship, but it's not always been an easy one. And some of the things that you're talking about, you know, I can put faces on that problem you would talk about. Recently, and this lady who's always been in the objective case and kickative mood since I've known her, came to me some time ago, and she always puts you in a very defensive mode. I mean, she can ask how you doing, like, how you doing? You know, you almost felt like you got to defend yourself when she would do that. But she came to me and she said, I want you to preach my funeral. And she makes a lot of people mad, but I've learned through the 30 years. She said, I want you to preach my funeral. I said, okay, when is it? And then she said, and you better say something good. And I said, well, then you better change. And so some of it you learn just to go through with the School of Hard Knocks and things of that. You learn people, and you adjust to them, and a lot of people do get upset, and I get upset sometimes, but we try to work through it. But appreciate so very much this great biblical and practical admonition that we've received, and I think all of us here can identify with some of these problems, and I think he's tried to help address those things actually before they develop, and that's always really, really good. So remember the books. If you have not purchased one, if Brother Elkins were here, he'd probably say, don't you want to go to heaven? and then also, remember the dinners tonight. We hope you can join us for the dinners. It's going to be a great time. Appreciate it so very, very much, and you're dismissed to the next session then.